All right. Good afternoon to all of you. Hope you had a nice weekend and you traveled far and wide. And welcome back to our daily grindstone. I just want to start with the publication of the latest edition of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, published today. It estimates that almost 690 million people went hungry in 2019. That's up by 10 million from 2018. And by nearly 60 million in 5 years. High costs and low affordability also mean billions cannot eat healthily or nutritiously. In a video message, the Secretary General warned that the pandemic is making things even worse and meaning more people could slip into hunger this year. He stressed that we cannot let this happen and that the report is clear. If the current trend continues, we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 2, that's zero hunger, by 2030. And to talk about this report, today my guest will be Maximo Torero Cullen, the Assistant Director General for Economic and Social Development in the department at the Food and Agricultural Organization in Rome. And we informed you over the weekend that the Secretary General took note of the Security Council's decision on Saturday to extend the UN cross-border mechanism in northwest Syria via the Bab el-Hawa border crossing for 12 months. This reauthorization will help ensure that humanitarian assistance for 2.8 million people in need in the Northwest is sustained until July next year. Cross-border humanitarian assistance remains a lifeline for millions of people in need in the area and beyond. The Secretary General reiterates his call on all parties to the conflict to ensure humanitarian access to all people in need in accordance with international humanitarian law. And turning to Yemen, I can confirm that the local de facto authorities in Yemen have officially communicated to the UN their approval for a UN-led technical assessment and repair mission on board the Safar oil tanker off the coast of Ras Isa. We are working to ensure that the technical team can deploy as soon as possible to assess the conditions of the tanker and undertake initial repairs. The experts will subsequently advise on any remaining measures that would be needed to avoid an oil spill, which could be catastrophic for the Yemeni communities, the Red Sea environment, and bordering countries and their communities, as well as international maritime traffic. Moving on to Libya, where I can tell you that we remain very concerned about the military buildup around Sirte and its potential impact on the civilian population. While active hostilities have ceased, the situation in southern Tripoli remains precarious due to explosive hazards left behind by withdrawing forces. 52 people have died and 96 have been injured by explosive hazards as they sought to return home or to clear mine-infected areas. The humanitarian community in Libya has reached about 34,000 people who were impacted or displaced by military escalations near Tarhuna and Sirte in June, with food, hygiene kits, and other household items, as well as health supplies and health services. Across Libya, about 430,000 people are now internally displaced. In addition, Libya continues to report increasing COVID-19 cases, with 1,512 confirmed cases and 40 deaths as of yesterday. The South, which accounts for only 8% of Libya's population, represents nearly half of all infections and 2/3 of all deaths. And turning to Mali, where protests which have been led by the M5 RFP movement have been ongoing in the country's major cities since Friday. In Bamako, several protesters were killed following violent clashes between demonstrators and security forces over the weekend, and several of the M5 leaders were arrested. The situation is reported to be tense today. Yesterday, the special representative of the Secretary General and representatives of the African Union, ECOWAS, and the European Union in Mali issued a joint communique condemning the violence on both sides and calling for restraint and urging the government of Mali to create the conditions for dialogue. The UN peacekeeping mission in the country is monitoring developments closely and continues to work with all stakeholders to find a solution. I also sadly want to announce that in the Nana Mambre prefecture in the Central African Republic, One peacekeeper was killed and 2 others wounded during an attack by the 3R group. I expect to have more details and a statement forthcoming in the next few hours. Meanwhile, in the Central African Republic, our peacekeeping colleagues are also continuing to support local anti-COVID efforts. The mission there has provided more medical and logistical and personal protective equipment, including masks, water fountains, and hygiene kits to authorities in the 3rd district in Bangui. The peacekeeping mission also financed the construction of a women's house in Ngubi in the Bria Haute-Koto prefecture. The house aims to provide a space where women can produce soap and provide hand washing advice to the local population. The mission and its partners are also committed to supporting women in the region by providing them with income-generating opportunities. And in South Sudan, the UN peacekeeping mission there has distributed face masks and soap, as well as training sessions to police officers in Rumbek in Lake State on how to use protective gear. And in the Philippines, where there are more than 56,000 cases of COVID, with more than 1,500 deaths, the UN team, led by the resident and humanitarian coordinator, Gustavo Gonzalez, has been operating in full emergency mode to support the government in its response. The UN arranged for 2 cargo flights carrying more than 1.3 million pieces of personal protective equipment for frontline health workers. In an effort to leave no one behind, the UN is also helping the most vulnerable refugees and migrants, including 5,000 Filipino workers who recently returned from overseas. The UN team has also been working to prevent the spread of the virus through communication campaigns, including webinars and training sessions in rural health centers. And turning to Kazakhstan, where today is a national day of mourning in memory of the victims of COVID, the head of the UN team there, Norimasa Shimomura, issued a statement expressing the UN team's condolences to the families who have lost loved ones. Mr. Shimomura said that the pandemic is more than a health crisis, having hit the most vulnerable people the hardest. He stressed that if we manage the recovery process right, we can better achieve sustainable development that creates a country that is more resilient against future challenges, reiterating the UN solidarity with the people of Kazakhstan. And a new research brief released today by our friends at the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, it analyzed the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on organized crime infiltration in the legal economy and illegal governance. The research shows that the pandemic has both reduced certain organized crime activities while providing opportunities for new ones. Organized criminal groups are trying to increase their profits not only by infiltrating private companies, but also by misusing public funds. UNODC warns that these groups are seeking the benefit from the COVID-19 response, just as they have done in the past of other humanitarian crises. More is available online, and we're happy to announce that we have a new resident coordinator in Honduras. Alice Shackelford of Italy has been appointed, and that comes following confirmation from the government of Honduras. As you know, resident coordinators seek to boost development coordination among UN agencies, funds, and programs. They are mobilizing resources to support government and local partners on the COVID-19 response. They have activated the full capacity of the UN on all fronts, including health, humanitarian, and socioeconomic. This is fundamental to supporting countries in a decade of action to achieve the SDGs. And we're also proud to announce that we remain at full gender parity among all our resident coordinators, serving 162 countries and territories. And as you know, the high-level political forum continues this week with presentations of the voluntary national reviews from member states reporting on their progress on implementing the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. The morning included 2 panel sessions. The first presentation was from Nepal and Georgia. The second panel featured presentations from Kenya, Nigeria, and Uganda. Individual presentations were also given by Bangladesh, India, Morocco, and Niger. And in the afternoon, Panama will present its review and will be followed by 2 panel presentations, the first from Benin and Costa Rica, and the second panel with Peru and Argentina. And this morning at a virtual side event, the Secretary General's Independent Accountability Panel for Every Woman, Every Child launched a report entitled Caught in COVID-19 Storms, progress and accountability for women's and children's and adolescents' health. This side event was co-hosted by the governments of Japan, South Africa, and Georgia. It highlighted the importance of health accountability as a practical tool to ensure that countries deliver on the promise of universal health coverage for women, children, and adolescents, and those furthest left behind, especially as the pandemic threatens to disrupt progress and reverse gains. And finally, I want to flag that tomorrow at 8 a.m. in the morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, will convene a special event that brings together women across different sectors in recognition of frontline leadership to build back better. The special event will look at how women leaders globally and locally are winning against COVID-19 on the socio-economic fronts, and why intergenerational leadership is needed now with a focus on inspiring action to advance sustainability and inclusion. Some of the participants in the Rise for All event will include the presidents of Switzerland, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and Africa's first female elected president, the former president of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. The keynote will be delivered by the Sustainable Development Goals advocate, Rasa Michel. For more information, the full list of leaders who have joined the Rise for All, go to un.org/Rise for All. And before we go to our guest, I'm happy to take some questions from you. So let me go to the right place. And let's get this over with. All right, let's go to the chat. Okay, James Bays, you have a question.
My question is about the cross-border aid statement that you put out. It seems to me that the statement you put out, and I know you've read again now, seems to be lacking something. Can we please get the Secretary General's view on the fact there is now only one border crossing authorised and the fact that aid can no longer go through the Bab al-Salam crossing?
Look, the Secretary General's view is what I've expressed. We had made, I think, the Secretary General's views ahead of the vote was clear, what he had asked, in light of the needs. We had a resolution, which was adopted. We are now working with that resolution and making things work. I can give you, to give you a bit more of context in terms of, which the kind of, excuse me, I just need to say something here. In terms of the aid that went through which border. So in the first 6 months of the year, we had 8,365 trucks across from Syria into Turkey. 1,500 of those were from Bab al-Salam, which is the point we can no longer use. 6,779 crossed from Bab al-Hawa so far this year. So this was the crossing was operating at near maximum capacity. We now anticipate that it will operate at maximum capacity. And obviously, in addition to the logistical challenges of the border, the aid deliveries will now need to travel further, including across lines of control. And as a result of the loss of Bab al-Salam, it'll be more costly, higher risk, less timely, and ultimately, I think, a more complicated humanitarian response.
So can I just follow up with a comment from Mark Cutts, who is your UN humanitarian coordinator? He says, access has been reduced at the very time when COVID-19 is spreading and we need more access. The exclusion of Bab al-Salam and al-Yarubia crossing points is very disappointing and presents major challenges for vulnerable citizens. Does the Secretary General believe and agree with Mr. Cutts that the outcome of the resolution is very disappointing? Because that's not the tone of your statement.
Look, there are different voices within the system. Mr. Cutts is on the front lines, and I think his voice is clearly an important one. I mean, you do the math. You know, we had asked for continuation of 2 crossings. We got 1. Would we have rather have had 2? Of course we would have.
Should that not have been in your statement?
You know, we express our position, and I think we make it. We've made it clear. We're always happy to receive edits from you, James, but I think Mr. Cutts has expressed his position, and of course we fully back Mr. Cutts, and he's doing an amazing job out on the front lines. And I've said what I've had to say. Mr. Iftikhar Ali.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Steph. Wire services are reporting a major Taliban attack in northern Afghanistan. Have you heard anything from UNAMA about it? And is there any reaction to this attack?
Yes. Yes, there is. I'm sorry. I'm having a little technical problems. You know, the Secretary General is obviously following the reports of the attack today in Samangan province. I think what's important for us is that all the parties take all feasible precautions to protect civilians from harm. I think we've seen over and over again civilians being hurt, being in the front lines of being victims. The urgency of achieving a peaceful settlement to the conflict in Afghanistan in order to bring an end to such violence is urgent, and all parties should be working in that same direction.
Thank you.
Majid, you have a question?
Yes, Stéphane, thank you very much. Actually, I have a follow-up to James's question. It's also I want to ask since the impact of the closure of the border crossing. On Saturday, Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky of Russia said that since the closure of the Alya Roubia border crossing in January, the humanitarian aid actually increased to northeast Syria. Can you, Stéphane, tell us if that's a fact? Is that true? Does the humanitarian aid increase to northeast Syria or other parts of Syria? Because you've been saying that you need more border crossing. Right?
I don't have the data in front of me to be able to answer that question, Majid. What I can tell you is now that we are down to 1 border crossing. The delivery of aid will be more complicated, will be more costly, will be done at a higher risk, and we think less effective.
And I have.
Go ahead.
Just on that, like, is there any assessment from OCHA, or should we expect about the impact of this?
Well, I think
of the resolution.
What I'm telling you is exactly their assessment. I mean, I'm not making. Most times,
I mean precise.
I try to make things up. I will, if they come up with more numbers, they will, and they will obviously report back to the Security Council as they do on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Okay, let me go back to the chat. Any other questions? I don't see anyone, but wave. Wave if you need to ask a question. Nizar, I think you're waving. I can't hear you, Nizar.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Did you read all the books in your library? That's my first question to you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, good.
All right. Stéphane, talking about Syria and the humanitarian situation, and of course, the warning you issued in the beginning, or the FAO, about the possibility of hunger, not just in Syria, in many countries. Syria presented back in May a letter complaining about serious aggression against it with regard to incinerating crops, stealing oil, also destroying power stations, and taking a lot of crops to Turkey and other places. They asked the United Nations to give an opinion about such activities and how compatible they are with the Charter of the United Nations. What has the Secretary General done about this? And what is your input regarding the situation if thousands of acres of land have been incinerated as suggested in the letter?
Look, I'll have to see if the letter was, what the official response to the letter is. What I can tell you in general terms is that years and years of conflict in Syria have obviously made the food situation that much worse. Whether it's whether it's agricultural lands being rendered unusable because of landmines, farmers fleeing. I mean, everything that you can imagine has, of course, made the situation worse. But I will check more officially on the letter for you.
Staying with regard to the crossings, can you confirm that the Salam crossing was ruled or was controlled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or Al-Nusra Front? And how much of the aid which used to cross through a Salam crossing point reached the people who are in need? Do you have any statistics about that?
No, I can't confirm the answer to your first question. Our aim is always to have, obviously, 100% of the aid reach the people that need it most. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Unless I see anybody else waving frantically, which I don't, I want to make sure that Maximo is on the line.